Welcome to Audible Archives. I'm Rob, your host and narrator, and tonight's tale, rewritten by Raul, brings us deep into one of Miss Marple's most unsettling investigations. A sudden death, a cloud of cruel village gossip, and a dying man's last whisper clue, a single word no one understood. Settle in as we unravel the thumb mark of St. Peter. "And now, Aunt Jane, your turn," said Raymond West, leaning forward with mock solemnity. "Yes, Aunt Jane, something spicy," Joyce Lambrier added, eyes dancing. Miss Marple regarded them both with her usual peaceful composure. "You are laughing at me, my dears," she said mildly. "You think that because I've spent my life tucked away in this out-of-the-world little village, I cannot possibly have had any interesting experiences. God forbid I should ever call village life peaceful," Raymond said fervently. "Not after the horrors you've revealed. Compared to St. Mary Mead, the outside world seems practically pastoral." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Human nature does not change, dear boy. One merely sees it more clearly in a village, that is all." "You really are unique, Aunt Jane," said Joyce. "Do you mind me calling you that? I don't know why I do it." "Don't you, my dear?" Miss Marple's eyes lifted briefly, full of teasing knowledge, the kind that made Joyce blush scarlet. Raymond fidgeted awkwardly, avoiding everyone's gaze. Miss Marple simply smiled, serene once more, and let the needles click in her lap. "Well," she went on, "it is true I have lived what people call an uneventful life. But I've had a good deal of experience solving little problems, ingenious ones in their way, only they would never interest you. Things like who cut the meshes of Mrs. Jones's string bag, or why Mrs. Sims only wore her new fur coat once. Most fascinating matters to anyone who cares for human nature, but not what you would call spectacular." She paused, pursed her lips, and bent over her knitting. "I must finish this decrease. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 3 pearl. Yes, now was I." Raymond opened his mouth, but Miss Marple continued without waiting for him. "Oh yes, my poor niece Mabel." Her voice softened. Mabel was a dear girl, truly very dear, but inclined to the dramatic. She would say far more than she meant whenever she was upset. She married a Mr. Denman at 22. I had hoped the attachment would fade, for he had a very violent temper, quite unsuited to Mabel's fluttering temperament, and there was insanity in his family. She shook her head. But girls were as obstinate then as they are now. Her needles clicked, and so she married him. Miss Marple's gaze drifted toward the fire. "I didn't see very much of her afterwards. She visited me now and again, and they invited me to stay with them. But I am not fond of staying in other people's houses, and always found a reason to decline. They had been married 10 years when Mr. Denman died, quite suddenly." Raymond and Joyce both leaned forward slightly. "There were no children," Miss Marple went on, "and he left everything to Mabel. I wrote to her, of course, offering to come. She sent back a very sensible reply. From the tone of it, I gathered she was not overwhelmed with grief, which was natural, given that they had been unhappy for some time." Miss Marple's needles paused midair. "It was not until 3 months later," she said quietly, "that I received a letter from her, hysterical, desperate, begging me to come at once, saying things were going from bad to worse, that she could not stand it much longer." A faint tremble seemed to pass through the room. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, "And so, naturally, I went. So, of course," Miss Marple went on, "I put Clara on board wages, sent a silver plate and the King Charles tankard of bank for safekeeping, and left for Mabel's at once." The needles in her hands clicked softly as she spoke, but her voice deepened, gaining a grave undertone. Myrtle Dean was a large, handsome place, quiet, comfortable, perfectly well run. There was a cook, a house parlor maid, and a private nurse to look after Mr. Denman's father, a poor old gentleman who was, as people say, not quite right in the head. He was peaceful enough, gentle even, but hopelessly odd at times. It was simply the family strain, you know? She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. But Mabel, I was quite shocked when I saw her. The child was a bundle of twitching nerves. She tried to explain, but she fluttered and stammered and contradicted herself until I had to probe indirectly, as one always must with her type. Miss Marple smiled faintly. So I asked, quite innocently, after the Gallaghers, friend she had mentioned often in her letters. To my surprise, she said she hardly saw them now. I tried a few other names. Same story every time. Miss Marple's needles paused, and then I realized something was very wrong indeed. I told her, firmly, that she was being foolish, shutting herself away like this, cutting herself off from everyone. That was when she suddenly broke down completely. Miss Marple's voice softened into imitation of Mabel's breathless despair. It isn't me. It's them. Nobody will speak to me, Aunt Jane. When I walk down the high street, people cross the road rather than meet me. I'm like a leper, shunned. I can't bear it. I shall have to sell the house and go abroad. But why should I be driven away when I've done nothing? I can't tell you how distressed I was. I was knitting a comfort for Mrs. Hay at the time, and in my agitation, I dropped 2 stitches and never recovered them. She shook her head at the memory. My dear Mabel, I said, this is astonishing. What is the cause of all this? But Mabel, oh, she was exactly as she had always been. Even as a child, she could never give a direct answer. She spoke in vague little bursts, wicked talk, gossiping people, silly ideas, but nothing you pinned down. So I said very firmly, there is obviously some story circulating about you. You know what it must be, and you are going to tell me. Mabel had moaned then, Miss Marple explained, pitiful and dramatic. It is so wicked. Of course it is wicked, I told her. But there is nothing in human nature that can astonish me anymore. Now, Mabel, what are people saying? Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, slower now, and finally it all came out. She looked around the room, letting the suspense ripple through the listeners. It seemed that Jeffrey Denman's sudden death had given rise to whisperings or rumors, and, in plain English, people were saying that Mabel had poisoned her husband. A murmur went through the room. You know, Miss Marple said quietly, there is nothing more cruel than talk, nothing harder to fight. When a story grows behind your back, you cannot deny it. You cannot challenge it, and it festers like mold. She nodded once, but I knew, absolutely knew, that Mabel could not have poisoned anyone. Whatever foolish things she might have done, she is simply not capable of deliberate harm. So I told her, there is no smoke without fire. Something must have started all this. Mabel insisted there was nothing at all, only that Jeffrey had been perfectly well at supper, then violently ill in the night. The doctor had been sent for, but he died just minutes after the doctor arrived. Miss Marple folded her knitting in her lap, and that, she said softly, was where the real problem began. Death, Miss Marple continued quietly, had been put down to poison mushrooms. She gave a tiny, brisk nod. Well, I said to Mabel, a sudden death like that might start tongues wagging, but not without some additional facts. Did you quarrel with Jeffrey? Recently, I mean. She admitted, after some hesitation, that yes, they had quarreled at breakfast on the very morning of his death. And naturally, I said, the servants heard it. They were in the room, she said. No, my dear, but they were very likely near the door. Miss Marple gave the faintest sigh. I knew all too well the carrying power of Mabel's high, shrill, hysterical voice. And Jeffrey Denman was no better. He had a loud, violent temper. When he raised his voice, the entire house would know it. I asked her what they had quarreled about. She shrugged, helpless, sullen. The usual things. Always the same. Something small would set him off. He'd say horrible things. I'd answer back, so I said gently, "There had been many quarrels? It wasn't my fault, my dear child," I said. "We are not discussing fault. In a village, private life is never private. Everyone knew you quarreled constantly. One particularly bad quarrel in the morning, and your husband is dead by nightfall. That is what people will put together." Miss Marple folded her hands primly, then resumed. "Is that all, Mabel? Or is there something else? I don't know what you mean. But I did know. I could always tell with Mabel, ever since she was a child, when she was holding something back. And she was holding back something now. Something quite important. It took some time, quite a lot of time, but at last she broke. She had gone to the chemist that very morning," Miss Marple said softly, "and had bought arsenic." A ripple of shock went through the room. "And of course she had to sign the poison book for it. Chemists always talk. Always." Miss Marple gave a tiny approving nod to herself. So I asked her who the doctor was. "Dr. Rawlinson," she said. "I had seen him in the village. A kind old gentleman, but vague as mist, short-sighted to the point of danger, slightly deaf and sensitive as a child. Not at all the type to withstand gossip or contradiction. I have lived long enough," Miss Marple remarked, "not to worship doctors. Some are clever, some are not. Half the time the best of them don't know what really matters. As for myself, I avoid doctors and their medicines entirely. So," she continued briskly, "I put on my bonnet and went to call upon Dr. Rawlinson. He was exactly as I expected. Kind, vague, and immediately defensive when Jeffrey's death was mentioned. He rambled for quite some time about fungi, poisonous species, varieties of edible mushrooms, so forth. He had questioned the cook. She had admitted that one or two of the mushrooms looked a little queer, but since the shop had sent them, she assumed they must be safe. "Yes," I told him, "and now she will remember them as bright orange with purple spots." Servants' memories improved by the day. Miss Marple gave a prim little nod. I learned that Jeffrey was already past speech when the doctor arrived. Unable to swallow, quite beyond help, he died within minutes. The doctor seemed confident in his diagnosis, but whether that confidence was based on knowledge or pure stubbornness, I could not tell. So I went straight home and said, quite frankly, "Mabel, why did you buy arsenic?" She burst into tears, wild, hopeless tears. "I wanted to kill myself," she said. "I was miserable. I wanted it all to end." "And have you the arsenic still?" I asked. "No, I threw it away." Miss Marple's expression grew distant, thoughtful. I sat and turned the matter over and over in my mind. And finally I asked the most practical question of all. "When Jeffrey was taken ill, did he call out to you? Call for help?" Mabel shook her head, and Miss Marple looked up then, her voice low, precise. And from that moment, I knew something was very wrong indeed. Mabel's voice trembled as she continued. "He rang the bell violently. Several times, they said. At last Dorothy, the house parlour-maid, heard it. She shook the cook awake, and the two of them came stumbling downstairs in the dark. When Dorothy saw him, Mabel whispered she was frightened. He was rambling delirious. Dorothy left the cook with him and ran straight to Mabel's room, pounding on the door until Mabel opened it. I got up at once," Mabel said. "I went to him. He looked dreadful, deathly ill." Miss Marple's needles paused mid-click. "Unfortunately," Mabel added, "Brewster, who attends old Mr. Denman, was away that night, so there was no one experienced, no one who knew what to do. Mabel had sent Dorothy for the doctor. She and the cook had stayed with Jeffrey. But after a few minutes," Mabel admitted, "I couldn't bear it. It was too horrible. I ran back to my room and locked the door. Miss Marple gave her a cold, pointed glance. "Very selfish and unkind of you," she said sharply. "You may be sure that behavior has not helped you. Koklev told everyone." She gave a small sigh. "Well, a bad business indeed." Miss Marple then interviewed the servants. The cook began immediately about mushrooms, but Miss Marple waved that aside. Quite done with mushrooms by then. Instead, she questioned them closely about Jeffrey's condition that night. Both women agreed. He was in great agony. He could not swallow. His voice was strangled when he tried to speak. And what he said was nonsense, mere delirium. "What did he say?" Miss Marple asked quietly. The two women exchanged glances. "Something about fish," said one. "A heap of fish," said Dorothy. "Some nonsense like that. I could see at once he wasn't in his right mind. Poor gentleman." Miss Marple frowned. A curious phrase, but meaningless, or so it seemed. As a last resort, she went to Brewster, Mr. Denman's attendant, a tall, gaunt, severe woman of 50. "It is a pity I wasn't here," Brewster said with tight-lipped disapproval. "Nobody seems to have done anything until the doctor arrived." "I suppose he was delirious?" Miss Marple asked. "But delirium, that's not a symptom of ptomaine poisoning, is it?" "It depends," Brewster replied. Miss Marple then asked after the old father, Mr. Denman. Brewster shook her head. "He is not well. Strong enough physically, except for his eyesight. That is failing badly. But his mind is failing fast. I have told both Mr. and Mrs. Denman he ought to be in an institution, but Mrs. Denman won't hear of it." Miss Marple nodded gently. "Yes, Mabel has always had a kind heart." "So there it all was," Miss Marple continued, "and I turned the matter over and over. There was," she concluded, "only one possible step. With rumors running wild, the only way to protect Mabel was to apply for a gemation. A post-mortem, properly done, must settle the matter." Mabel protested, of course, tears and sentiment about disturbing the dead, piece of grave, and so on, but Miss Marple was adamant. "I shall spare you the details," she said. "We got the order. They exhumed the body. They conducted the autopsy. And the result? No trace of arsenic, but also no definite evidence as to the cause of death. So that," Miss Marple said dryly, "didn't help much. Rumors continued. Rare poisons, undetectable toxins, shadowy compounds that left no trace. Nonsense, of course. But the whispers grew. Miss Marple had spoken personally to the pathologist. He was evasive, almost a point of rudeness, but she pressed him firmly, politely, and relentlessly. He admitted two things. One, it was highly unlikely that poisoned mushrooms had caused the death. Two, the symptoms suggested a strong vegetable alkaloid, some plant-derived poison. Miss Marple folded her knitting into her lap. "And that," she said softly, "was when the truth began to take shape." Miss Marple leaned forward, needles resting quietly in her lap, as she continued in her soft, matter-of-fact voice. "The idea that came to me was this," she said. "Supposing the taint of insanity was in Jeffrey Denman's blood, as well might he not have made away with himself?" She paused delicately, letting the weight of the suggestion settle. He had studied medicine once, you know. Only for a short time, but long enough to learn the effects of various poisons. And if a man with such a legacy of madness were pushed far enough, well, she sighed. "I didn't think it very likely, but it was all I had to go on, and I assure you I was nearly at my wit's end." Her eyes softened. "You will laugh, of course. Modern young people always do. But when I am in real trouble, I say a little prayer. Anywhere, walking down the street, standing in a shop queue, even at bazaar, and I always get an answer. Not always a direct one. Sometimes the things seem so trifling, so unconnected, but there it is." She folded her hands. "I had a little text pinned above my bed as a girl. Ask and you shall receive." She took a breath. Now, on the morning I'm talking about, I was walking down the high street, praying hard, and I shut my eyes for just a moment. And when I opened them, what do you think I saw? 5 faces stared at her. Not one of them could have guessed. Miss Marple spoke with quiet triumph. The fishmonger's window, and in it, one thing only, a fresh haddock. Raymond West groaned theatrically. Could Lord and answer the prayer via haddock? Raymond, Miss Marple said sharply, there is no need for profanity. The hand of God is everywhere. She gave him a reproachful look. What caught my eye were the spots, the black marks on the skin. They are called the marks of St. Peter's thumb. There is a legend, you know. Joyce Lempriere bit her lip to keep from laughing. And that, Miss Marple continued serenely, brought everything together. Faith, the faith of St. Peter and fish. Sir Henry Clithering blew his nose rather suddenly. Joyce looked away, shoulders shaking. But what did that bring to my mind? Miss Marple went on calmly. Why, of course, both the cook and the parlor maid mentioned that the dying man himself had spoken of fish. Her voice became crisp. I was certain, absolutely certain, that the key to the mystery lay in that single word. She tapped her needles lightly against her palm. I went home determined to dig to the bottom of it. We go by the context. Has it ever occurred to you, Miss Marple said, leaning forward, how seldom people quote the actual words spoken to them? She gave them all a bright, bird-like glance. We go by context. There's a place on Dartmoor called Grey Weathers, 2 stone circles. If you spoke of Grey Weathers to a farmer, he'd think of the stones, but an outsider might think you meant the weather. She nodded meaningfully. So when Dorothy said a heap of fish, she meant something like that, something that sounded similar. Miss Marple lifted a forefinger. I saw both the cook and Dorothy separately. First, the cook. He mentioned a heap of fish, she said. Or some sort of fish. Can't remember which. Not the kind you'd send to table. Maybe a perch or pike. No, not AP. Then Dorothy. Some outlandish sort of fish, she said. He said a pile of something. I'm sure it wasn't a heap, miss, more like pile. And it began with C. But not cod, nor a crayfish. Miss Marple allowed herself a small, proud smile. And that, she said, was where I am really proud of myself. She lowered her voice, confidingly. You see, I know nothing about drugs. Nasty things. Dangerous things. But I do know the price of fish. Miss Marple lifted her chin with modest pride, eyes shining behind her spectacles. I have always said, she began delicately, that my grandmother's tansy tea's worth all the bottles in a chemist's shop. But on that day, I needed something stronger than herbs. There were several old medical volumes in the house, thick things with brown calfskin covers, and in one of them, quite luckily, was an index of drugs. She tapped her knitting needle lightly against the arm of her chair. You see, my idea was this. Geoffrey Denman must have taken some particular poison, and in his last moments, unable to swallow, delirious, barely able to form a proper word, he had been trying to name it. She looked at each face in turn, savoring the moment. So I went down the list. She said, I began with the H's, nothing useful there. Then I turned to the P's. And almost at once, mind you, I came to a word that made me sit up straight. She paused for dramatic effect. Pilocarpine. A ripple of interest moved around the room. Miss Marple leaned forward. Now picture a dying man who can hardly speak, a man choking, gasping, trying to force out the name of a drug. Pilocarpine. What might that sound like to a cook who has never heard of it? Or to a parlor maid who can't imagine anything stranger than cod or kippers? She spread her hands. Of course, would sound like pile of carp. Sir Henry slapped his knee. By Jove! Dr. Pender shook his head admiringly. I'd never have hit upon that. Dr. Lloyd murmured, Remarkable. Mr. Petherick simply said, Really most interesting, as though filing revelation into some mental cabinet label useful for future clients. Miss Marple continued. So, I turned to the page indicated in the index. I read the description carefully. Though I can never pretend to understand half the medical jargon, most of it concerned the eyes. Her voice dropped, gaining gravity. But then I saw it, a single line, a line that changed everything. She quoted it softly, has been tried with success as an antidote for atropine poisoning. A hush fell. Miss Marple's voice warmed with conviction. I cannot describe to you the light that burst upon me then. It was like the sun breaking through fog. Everything fitted perfectly, horribly, inevitably. Raymond leaned in. I'm not even going to guess. Tell us, Aunt Jane. What was it? Miss Marple folded her hands calmly. Now, I knew nothing about these dreadful alkaloids, but I did know this. When my eyesight began failing some years ago, the doctor ordered me drops with atropine sulfate in them. She let the implications settle before continuing. I went straight upstairs to old Mr. Denman's room. I didn't prevaricate. I didn't soften. I said, Mr. Denman, I know everything. Why did you poison your son? She shivered slightly. He looked at me, quite calmly at first. A handsome old man, in his way. Then he began to laugh. Not a laugh of amusement, but a thin, vicious, horrible cackle. The sort of laugh you hear from those whose minds have, well, gone astray. I only heard such a laugh once before, when poor Mrs. Jones lost her reason. She took a breath. Yes, he said, I was too clever for Geoffrey. He was going to put me away in an asylum. His own father. I heard them whispering about it. Mabel stood up for me. She's a good girl, but she couldn't have stopped him forever. He always had his way. Her voice mimicked the old man's cracked tone, so I settled it. I settled him. I crept down in the night. Brewster was away. It was all so very easy. She stopped, letting the horror of the confession resonate through the room. Miss Marple folded her hands neatly, her expression serene despite the dark tale she had just unfolded. My dear son was asleep. Her voice shifted, subtly echoing the madness she had once heard firsthand. He always kept a glass of water beside the bed. Woke up every night to drink it off. Habit, you know. She drew a slow breath. I'd poured it away, and emptied my bottle of eye drops into glass instead. Only a tablespoonful. Quite enough. And so he drank it. They came to me in the morning very gentle, very solemn, breaking the news as though I'd shatter like glass. Miss Marple's fingers twitched in memory. Ha! The echo died. No one in the room spoke. She continued softly, her tone returning to calm narration. Well, that was the end of it. Naturally, the poor old man was sent to an asylum. He was no longer capable of distinguishing right from wrong. And once the truth came out, everyone felt dreadful for Mabel. They couldn't do enough for her. Flowers, calls, whispered apologies, that sort of thing. But the harm had been done. In small towns, suspicion sticks like burrs to wool. She sighed. If Geoffrey hadn't realized in those last conscious moments what he had swallowed and tried to name the antidote, pilocarpine, we might never have known. Funny, isn't it? His last struggle was the key to clearing the woman he'd spent years quarreling with. She glanced toward Dr. Lloyd. Atropine poisoning has very definite signs. Dilated pupils and so on, but poor Dr. Ronson was so short-sighted he could barely see his own stethoscope. And in the same medical book I read afterward, It described ptomaine symptoms and atropine symptoms, surprisingly alike. If you don't look closely, a wry smile tugged at her lips. And to this day, I cannot pass a pile of fresh haddock without remembering the thumb mark of St. Peter. There was a long, thoughtful silence. Then Mr. Petheritt, almost reverently, "Miss Marple, my very dear friend, you are amazing." Sir Henry nodded gravely. "I shall advise Scotland Yard to put you on retainer." Raymond West stretched, trying to regain composure. "Well, Aunt Jane," he said, "there's one thing you don't know." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked once. "Oh yes, I do, dear." Raymond blinked. "It happened right before dinner," she said gently, "when you took Joyce to admire the sunset by the jasmine hedge." Joyce turned bright red. "That spot," Miss Marple added, "is quite popular for such things. The milkman asked Annie to put the banns in that very place." "Aunt Jane," Raymond groaned, "don't demolish all the romance. Joyce and I aren't, good heavens, like the milkman and Annie." Miss Marple smiled her sweet, disarming smile. "Oh, that's where you're wrong, dear. People are all very much alike, really." She lowered her voice, amusement twinkling in her eyes. "Fortunately for us all, they rarely realize it." You've been listening to The Thumb Mark of St. Peter, narrated by Rob and rewritten for Audible Archives by Raul. If you enjoyed this chilling piece of village intrigue, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more mysteries brought back to life. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and stay listening.